The $17 billion China-financed high-speed rail linking Kuala Lumpur and Singapore is no longer in pipeline, according to some media reports. How can China manage the risks of mega projects? And what about the other parties as well? Experts weigh in after this. You're watching World Insight. The program comes to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. I'm Tian Wei. Malaysia's recently elected Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad says to the press that he intends to cancel a high-speed rail project linking Kuala Lumpur with Singapore. China, Japan, South Korea and others have been lobbying for the contract to provide trains for the 350-kilometer line, which would have cut travel times to just 90 minutes. But Mahathir says to the press that Malaysia cannot afford it. For its part, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that China was ready to forge ahead with close cooperation with Malaysia.
Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad says his administration will seek to cancel the China-financed high-speed rail project. The planned high-speed rail link between Kuala Lumpur and Singapore costs more than $17 billion. Before the party's shock election victory on May 9, the Pakatan Harapan Alliance had vowed to review all mega projects.
It is a final decision, but it will take time because we have an agreement with Singapore. It's not beneficial. It's going to cost us a huge sum of money. We'll make no money at all from this operation.
China is also leading the construction of the $15 billion East Coast Rail Link, as well as providing 85% of the funding through soft loans. Mahathir says the government wants to renegotiate terms with China, questioning the necessity, viability and cost of the project. China believes economic and trade cooperation is beneficial for both people.
China and Malaysia are friendly neighbors and have maintained close trade and investment cooperation, which has brought tangible benefits to the people from both sides. We're ready to continue our close cooperation with Malaysia.
According to the new Finance Minister of Malaysia, Lim Guan Ang, total government debt had spiraled to more than 1 trillion ringgit, or 80% of GDP. Malaysia's new leadership says the previous government hid the true scale of the country's debt. Mahathir's government has made it a point to get a handle on state debts.
So what's going to happen to that rail link? And what is going to be China's role? What's going to be the change? With me here in Beijing, Zhang Zhenping, who is the Director General for the Center of Regional Cooperation from the Ministry of Commerce. Welcome, sir. Also, in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, we have Dr. Munir Majid, who is the Chairman of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council in Malaysia. I want to welcome both of you, gentlemen. May I understand, first of all, from Dr. Majid, since you are in Malaysia and I understand since the election, Malaysian politics and policies have been shifting dramatically. Help us to understand what exactly is the latest situation. Despite the enormous amount of media reports, we do not know exactly what is happening right now. Dr. Majid.
I think the decision that has been made in Malaysia to review the high-speed rail project and to try and renegotiate the East Coast rail network is driven primarily by the domestic fiscal situation. As you rightly pointed out, the fiscal situation is actually quite deep. The hole is not a very comfortable one, and the 1 trillion Malaysian ringgit sort of hole that the government finances finds itself in is not a comfortable place to be in. Hence, there has to be, a review. Therefore, Malaysia must set its house in order, especially in terms of financial sustainability, and it has to measure up against these projects, these projects in the context of financial discipline. Otherwise, we might be rolling down the hill financially.
Right. Dr. Majid, if I could just ask a little further, is there a timeline about the review process? How long, in other words, will it take the review? Who is going to do the review? Eventually, who is going to make the decision? And do we know the decision-making process? How about the parties involved so far? Dr. Majid.
Yes, I think, the Prime Minister has said that a review will take place. I think the body that will be mostly involved in that review is a council of eminent persons that was set up by the Prime Minister, comprising a former Finance Minister, Tun Daim Zainuddin, a former Central Bank Governor, Tan Sri Zeti, a former CEO of Petronas, Hassan Marikan, a leading economist called Jomo Sundram, and Malaysia's venerable businessman, Mr. Robert Kwok, based in Hong Kong, as you know. And this committee has been talking and listening to people about their different viewpoints on these projects, As far as high-speed rail is concerned, the problem is when you have a situation as existed before where there was not enough openness and people felt pressured in whatever they said or spoke, in relation to projects, they might not come out with a full, story or the full analysis. We have a more open situation now, and people are now saying, yes, it does not make sense.
All right.
Yes, it is not feasible. Yes, it will take, 75 years to get the money back, assuming, all these assumptions of feasibility in terms of price of tickets, and number of passengers, and so on and so forth.
All right. Under the current circumstances, Mr. Zhang, what does it mean for all the parties, whether they have been participating in trying to getting the contract or in the bidding process, and also in what it would take eventually to get the projects done? It's not just China, but also other countries as well.
I think that right now the things happened in Malaysia actually make us quite confused, also quite disappointed. That for Chinese side, in the past we already have so a lot of input on those high-speed railway projects, but today due to the change of government and then all of the stakeholders get into trouble. Also, maybe we will pay more cost in the future. So I'm afraid that for Chinese side, it reminds us that in the future we have to consider this type of unpredictable huge political risks. And for Chinese, those corporations and the relative stakeholders, we also need to consider how to avoid, the potential risks in the future.
But how to avoid that would be a very tricky question, isn't it? With the change of government in a country like Malaysia. Let me ask you, Dr. Majid, what do you think? Would these changes, this is not the only project that has been changed or being on hold. What would this mean to the credibility of Malaysia as a whole? Of course, people understand totally about the feasibility that Malaysians need to think about these projects. But will they mean that 3 years or 4 years from now, if the government changes again, there will be another decision being made about these projects or other projects which this administration is being put into practice? So I guess sustainability and stability is the thing that investors think about. I wonder from Malaysia's side, how do you see that perspective?
I think obviously, when a new government comes in, it will want to review the massive projects, the big projects, and it wants to set it against, the sustainability, the financial sustainability of those projects. And I think when things come out into the open very clearly, it will be indicated whether a project is sustainable or not, objectively speaking. objectively speaking. And if that comes out, it's very difficult to reverse, and bring the project again, as you say, the chopping and changing that takes place. So the most important thing is the openness in the discussion, openness in the analysis, and openness in the facts and figures. Insofar as ECRL is concerned, of course, it involves China, and there are certain aspects of the agreement which the present government finds unsatisfactory. And I think it's very important, I think, from China's viewpoint too, in the context of BRI. It's not exactly a BRI project, but in the context of BRI, to show an ability to relook at issues that impinge on financial sustainability. As you recall, as you will know, there's so many criticisms about BRI will impose overpowering financial demands on countries which will do themselves self-harm into getting into projects, which may not actually be financially sustainable, which will place them in a dependent financial position and therefore result in an unequal sort of relationship with China. China believes in an equal relationship, in mutual respect, and also does not believe in undermining any regime or government through its financial failure of that government. Therefore, it is an important point, not just for Malaysia, but also for China, insofar as ECRL is concerned, to relook and have a look.
Okay. Got it. Mr. Majid, we got your points. That point has been repeated over and over again about assessment report, openness and things. But let me go to you, Mr. Zhang, as well. So should those participating in this project forget about this project? Because according to Mr. Majid's answer, you don't have a timeline, you don't have a framework yet, you don't know which rules that these assessments will be based on, because they are about so-called gathering information. Should parties involved forget about this project? This also leads to other questions involving about overseas investment for any country. I think for emerging and developing countries particularly, that what kinds of conditions has to be ripe to form a partnership with countries, with companies from other countries, let's just say from other developing and emerging economies. Mr. Zhang.
Yeah. I think that at this time point, actually, from Chinese side, we have our strong, capacity for infrastructure constructions. Meanwhile, including Malaysia and other economies, on platform of BRI, they have strong demand for infrastructure improvement. In this regard, there is a very huge potential. However, I think that this type of case, remind the Chinese side that in the future we have to fully, consider, the real demand from host countries, and also we need to seek the possible approach to guarantee, those existing negotiations will be, keeping, and how to make guarantees for those existing, contracts.
But that's the question, isn't it? I mean, the question is how? How?
Firstly, I think that in the future, maybe, we will require those government, host countries' government to provide enough guarantee, for our potential corporations. Maybe risks fund, this type of things. Also, will some of, your government, your insurance provided by, a governmental side or by insurance companies in that countries. Also, I think that maybe from Chinese side, we need to consider how to make a joint venture with those host countries in order to, prevent the potential, huge, risks, something like that.
Dr. Majid, according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, China will continue to have close cooperation with Malaysia, as the Foreign Ministry spokesperson just said. But obviously, this is one of those issues that the Chinese would have in their mind when they are so-called continuing their close cooperation with Malaysia. Dr. Majid, what would that mean for the potential of so-called cooperation?
You know, we are talking here, Malaysia was the first country to establish diplomatic relations with PRC. It's been 44 years, since relations
yes, we know
have been
that.
established. So it's a long period of relationship. And in those 44 years, 22 of them were under Dr. Mahathir's leadership when he was Prime Minister for the first time.
Right.
It's half the period. And therefore, if you look back and see what his relationship was like with China during his time, you will see that, he has absolutely, no inclination to want to have a bad relationship. In fact, he sees China as a great potential power with whom he wants to engage, and engage with China he did in his time. And therefore, what he is doing now is to review what he thought was something that was agreed upon which may harm Malaysia's fiscal position. And so it is quite right for a country to look at its self-interest. It doesn't mean that it is projecting against the other country, China. And so people try to interpret these sort of domestic decisions in the context of its external ramifications, and therefore saying it is anti-China or anti-Singapore, which is not the case. It is pro-Malaysia. That's what's being done.
Right.
Now the question is, I think you asked us now about the future, what you do in the future in terms of contracts and so on. I mean, quite clearly, it doesn't mean the end of the relationship, not necessarily even the end of the ECRL, because they say they want to negotiate it, and China can show that it is able to do so, or there will be other projects. There will be other projects, huge other projects that will come in the future when Malaysia is more capable fiscally to undertake them.
All right. Mr. Zhang, before we go, we only have a minute and a half to go. Mr. Zhang, how is China and other countries, once again, I emphasize on emerging and developing economies. Well, the countries' economies are strengthening their muscles. They are doing more cooperation internationally. But what are some of the most important factors ones have to think about before doing the investing and also before forming partnership? Mr. Zhang, whether this is a case study, typical or not, that's a question mark, but some of the things are still really worth quite some thinking.
For me, I think that the most important thing is that we have to seek, a legal supporting framework in host countries. That means, even if there will be potential, change of government, and the existing contract should be protected by, host countries' law and the rules and regulations. Meanwhile, I think that for between China and Malaysia and other countries, maybe we will have our bilateral investment treaties or free trade agreements. We hope that this type of umbrella also can provide protection for China's investment in those countries.
Well said to both of you. Thank you so much, Zhang Jianping and Munir Majid. Really appreciate it. With that, we're coming to the end of today's program. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us. World Inside CGTN into your search engine. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on different kinds of social media platforms as well. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Inside team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.